Black CEO bride humiliated at dinner she didn't yell she bought the mansion next day. Hello everyone, before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. You think money makes you family. Her words didn't echo, they detonated. Every head in the ballroom turned toward the source of the blast, Margaret Wexler, crimson gown, diamond smile, and venom in her voice. Across from her, Amara Lewis stood in a white wedding dress that shimmered under chandelier light, calm, still, too still. The groom, Ethan, froze halfway between them, one hand gripping the edge of the table, the other trembling around a champagne flute. "Let's toast," Margaret said, lifting her glass high. "To the little gold digger who just married into our fortune." Gasps, soft at first, rolled through the room like thunder trapped under silk. Cameras came out, flashes, whispers, clicks. Some guests pretended to cough. Others didn't bother hiding their delight. Amara didn't blink. Her face was carved from silence. The orchestra faltered one violin string, squealing before falling quiet. The only sound left was Margaret's laugh, sharp, practiced, expensive. Ethan whispered, "Mother, please." But Margaret didn't stop. "You see, my dear, we don't measure love in hashtags and startups. We measure it in pedigree." She turned, addressing the crowd like a queen lecturing peasants. "And I'm afraid this," she gestured at Amara's ring, "was a very cheap investment." The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it was cruel enough to fill the space where music had died. Amara set her glass down with the precision of someone counting seconds before impact. She looked at the guests, each one reflected in the golden rim of her wine glass, and then at Margaret. Her voice was steady. "Are you done, Mrs. Wexler?" The room froze. That tone, polite, surgical, carried more power than a shout ever could. But before the silence could breathe, Margaret snapped again louder, "Done." "Oh no, sweetheart. We're just beginning." A waiter nearby, young, nervous black, paused mid-pour. The wine trembled in his bottle. He didn't know who she was, but he knew the look of someone being tested in public. Amara exhaled slowly. Same script, different room, she thought. Then she smiled, faint, deliberate, a prelude to a storm no one yet saw coming. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now back to Amara Lewis. For 3 full seconds, no one moved. It was the kind of silence that made crystal chandeliers hum. Amara stood there, perfect posture hands, resting gently on the edge of the linen-covered table, like a queen being measured by a jury she did not respect. Margaret's laugh echoed once more, hollow now, feeding off its own cruelty. "Look at her," Margaret said, turning to the audience of suits and sequins. Not a word. Maybe she's calculating how much this night will cost her. Soft chuckles rippled across the tables. A camera flash went off. Then another. Ethan looked between them, pale and cornered. "Mom, please, this isn't the place." "Oh, it's exactly the place," she replied, sipping her champagne. "When you let outsiders in, you do it publicly so they know where they stand." Amara's gaze didn't waver. She took in the gilded mirrors, the candlelight, the stairs. Her reflection stared back from every polished surface, multiplied, scrutinized, distorted. She'd been here before, not in this room, but in others, just like it. Rooms where she had to justify her presence, her success, her silence. At 22, it was a board meeting in Chicago. A venture partner called her decorative. At 28, a journalist called her lucky. Tonight, it was gold digger. Same energy. Different wallpaper. She picked up her napkin and dabbed her lips, small, deliberate movements that made the cruelty look smaller than it thought it was. Margaret mistook the calm for defeat. See, no class for confrontation. Just sitting there. A woman at the back whispered, "Maybe she's in shock." A man beside her muttered, "Or maybe she's smarter than all of us." At table 4, a young server named Jaden swallowed hard. The wine bottle in his hand trembled. He looked around. No one was stopping it. No one was stepping in. His phone slid halfway out of his pocket before he caught Amara's eyes. She shook her head once, subtle, commanding, as if to say, "Not yet." Then she turned to Margaret. "You're right about one thing," she said softly. "This night will cost someone a lot." Margaret's brow lifted, half amusement, half disbelief. "Is that a threat, dear?" Amara smiled faintly. "No, just an invoice." The guests shifted. Some chuckled nervously. Others stared, sensing something shift under the calm. Ethan's voice cracked. "Amara, maybe we should." She didn't look at him. "Sit down, Ethan. You'll want to hear this." The orchestra tried to restart a polite cover, but even the violins seemed afraid to interrupt. The moment had weight thick, invisible electric. Margaret raised her glass again, desperate to reclaim the room. To family, she declared. But no one echoed her this time. The storm hadn't started. It had simply taken a breath. A waiter dropped a fork. The sound, tiny metallic, split the tension like lightning through silk. Margaret turned sharply. "Pick that up." Her tone snapped the air in half. Jaden bent quickly, but his hands shook. From her seat, Amara watched him. Quiet empathy passed between them, one person surviving a moment they didn't start. Margaret exhaled dramatically. "You see, Ethan? This is what happens when you open the door too wide. Standards fall." A few guests forced polite laughter. The rest pretended to check their phones. Amara stayed still, her hand tracing the edge of the crystal glass. Every reflection inside it looked fractured like the truth trying to escape. "Mrs. Wexler," she said evenly, "is this how you welcome everyone who joins your family? Or just the ones who don't look like you?" The question didn't need volume. It had gravity. Whispers crawled through the tables. A woman at table 9 lowered her camera. Someone at table 1 cleared his throat too loudly. Margaret smiled, all porcelain and poison. "Oh, sweetheart, don't play the victim. No one here mentioned color." "Didn't have to," Amara replied. "It's baked into the laughter." Ethan stood unsure which battlefield to join. "Mom, please." Margaret didn't look at him. "Sit, Ethan. She's performing." Amara's brow lifted slightly. "If this were a performance, you'd have paid for tickets, not a venue you don't own." The jab landed. A hush. Even the chandeliers seemed to stop shimmering. In the corner, a live band member whispered to another, "She's different. She's not breaking." Jaden, the server, stepped back toward the table. He placed a new flute of champagne in front of Amara, quietly saying, "On the house, ma'am." Margaret caught it. "Excuse me, did she ask for that?" Jaden froze. "No, ma'am, You're dismissed," Margaret snapped. Amara's voice cut in soft but exact. "He stays." That line hit like a verdict. The young man didn't move, but his chin lifted an inch. Small but seismic. Across the ballroom, someone started recording. A red light blinked. Margaret saw it and hissed, "Turn that off," but Amara didn't. "Let it record," she said. "Every empire built on humiliation deserves its documentation." The words drew a low murmur, admiration mixed with fear. Ethan looked down his mother's hand, gripping his sleeve like a leash she refused to drop. Margaret scoffed, trying to rebuild her wall of superiority. "Do you even know where you are?" Amara leaned back, eyes steady. "Yes. In a mansion leased from my company." Margaret blinked. Just once. A tiny fracture in her certainty. No one caught it except Amara, and that was enough. The first crack had formed. She lifted her glass and whispered almost to herself, "Pressure makes diamonds. Let's see what this room produces." Margaret's laugh returned, but it didn't sound the same this time. It wobbled a little too loud, a little too forced. "You own this. My dear, you've really let imagination ruin reality." Amara didn't respond right away. She simply watched the older woman with that calm, surgical stillness that made other people speak faster, dig deeper, expose themselves. A distant thunder rolled outside. The weather matched the mood, heavy, metallic, close. Jaden poured another glass of champagne, carefully avoiding eye contact. The room felt smaller now, like oxygen was running out. Ethan whispered again, "Amara, please, she's just showing me who she is," Amara replied softly. "And I'm letting her finish the sentence." Margaret tilted her head. "Finish it. Oh, darling, it was finished the second you walked into this family pretending to belong." That word pretending hung in the air. It reminded Amara of the first gala she'd ever attended 15 years ago. She'd walked in wearing a rented gown and a borrowed smile. The hostess had looked at her the same way Margaret did, now like an intruder in silk. That night, she promised herself she'd never beg for a seat at anyone's table again. She smiled faintly. "Pretending is something I left behind a long time ago." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "Then what exactly are you doing here, delivering a lesson?" Amara said. "You'll realize that soon." The words hit with precision, polite, poised, dangerous. From the back, a young woman, the event coordinator, whispered to her colleague, "She's not bluffing. I've seen that name before. Lewis Holdings owns half the block." Her voice wasn't quiet enough. 2 nearby guests heard. Then 4. Then 10. Whispers turned to ripples, moving through the hall like wind through glassware. Margaret sensed it tried to reclaim control. She raised her voice louder, now brittle at the edges. Enough of this nonsense, Ethan. Tell her to stop embarrassing herself. Ethan didn't answer. His silence said everything. Margaret turned to the guests, her tone snapping like a whip. You people act as if She stopped mid-sentence. Too late. Amara stood. Slow. Deliberate. Her chair barely made a sound. Every movement she made seemed to pull the room into orbit around her. Careful, Amara said quietly. You're about to say something you can't unsay. No one breathed. A camera shutter clicked. Margaret's jaw trembled. You think you can threaten me? No, Amara said. I don't threaten people beneath my pay grade. Someone near the stage stifled a gasp. Another whispered, oh my God. The lights flickered slightly, maybe from the storm outside, maybe from the pressure in the air. Amara leaned forward just enough for her voice to carry. Tell me, Mrs. Wexler, does your arrogance come with a mortgage or is it fully paid off? A murmur swept the room, electric and irreversible. The balance of power had shifted no longer in whispers, but in silence too heavy to ignore. And in that silence, Margaret Wexler finally looked afraid. The ballroom had turned into a courtroom. No judge, no gavel, just 100 eyes learning what truth sounds like when it's spoken softly. Margaret's pearls rattled against her glass. You've had your little speech, she said, voice thin but still sharp. Now sit down before you humiliate yourself further. Amara didn't move. Humiliation isn't contagious, Mrs. Wexler. It belongs to the one who creates it. Her tone was calm, but her words carried weight, the kind that bent the air around them. At the back, Jaden finally slipped his phone out and hit record. The red light blinked like a pulse. Next to him, another waiter whispered, she's really handling it. Jaden nodded. She's doing more than that. She's teaching it. A murmur started. Guests who once laughed were now exchanging uncertain glances. One woman whispered, is she really someone important? The event coordinator, pale, replied, if she's who I think she is, this hotel doesn't even own the land it stands on. Margaret caught fragments of their whispers. Her smile faltered. I see you've brought your audience. How convenient. Amara tilted her head. No, you brought them. I just turned on the lights. The statement sliced through the room, quiet, clean, final. Even the orchestra stopped pretending to tune. Ethan finally spoke, voice low. Mom, enough. She turned on him instantly. Don't you dare take her side. I'm taking the side that still has dignity, he said, his hands trembling. The guests gasped. It wasn't loud, but it was unanimous. The control Margaret had wrapped around the evening began to unravel thread by golden thread. A man near the center table, older, maybe a business partner, stood up. This is unbecoming, Margaret, he said. You're embarrassing yourself. Her jaw dropped. Excuse me, he adjusted his cufflinks. If you can't see class when it stands in front of you, that's not her fault. It's yours. A soft applause started, hesitant but real. Amara didn't smile. She didn't need to. The room was correcting itself justice by social instinct. Margaret turned desperate for rescue. Ethan, tell them she's not what she claims. Ethan looked at Amara, then at the crowd. Maybe it's time they find out for themselves. For a heartbeat, the storm outside roared thunder, shaking the tall windows. Amara's reflection flickered in the glass, calm, unbothered, inevitable. She turned to Jaden, who still held the phone, his hand shaking. You don't need to post that, she said softly. Just remember it. Jaden swallowed. Yes, ma'am. Margaret's voice cracked. You think one dramatic night makes you powerful, Amara met her gaze. No. Building power despite nights like this does. And for the first time, no one laughed. No one looked away. Because now everyone in the room understood the storm wasn't outside anymore. It was standing at the head of the table, dressed in white. Lightning flared through the tall windows, a flash of white that froze every expression in the ballroom, guilt, fear, disbelief. The music had died, but the tension kept playing. Margaret lifted her chin again, trying to resurrect the poise she'd lost. You think a few poetic lines make you superior, she said. Power isn't about words. Amara's reply came like a scalpel. You're right. It's about ownership. And that's where you should start worrying. A few guests exchanged startled looks. One whispered, did she just say ownership? Another murmured, she's bluffing. But the tremor in Margaret's hand betrayed her. She wasn't sure anymore. Jaden stepped back toward the curtain, still filming. He caught every word, every flinch. The red recording light painted the edges of the room like a warning beacon. Enough, Margaret said finally, her voice brittle. Security. Her command hung in the air, but no one moved. The staff hesitated, uncertain whom they worked for at that moment. Amara turned slowly, her voice level but filled with quiet authority. If you're calling security, make sure they know who signs their checks. That sentence landed like a thunderclap. A couple near the back gasped. The event coordinator pulled up her tablet, scrolling frantically, and then froze. Her eyes widened. She whispered, "Oh my God," what her colleague asked. "She's right. Lewis Holdings. They bought this estate last quarter." The whisper spread fast, skipping from table to table like wildfire cloaked in politeness. Margaret saw it in their faces before she heard the words. The doubt, the shift, the realization that the woman she'd mocked might very well own the ground beneath her designer heels. "Stop whispering," Margaret barked. "She's lying. This is all some spectacle for attention." Amara tilted her head slightly. "Attention, I didn't need to announce my last acquisition. It made the Wall Street Journal without my help." Her words hit harder than any shout could. They didn't explode. They landed. Ethan sat down slowly, his head in his hands. For the first time that evening, the son of old money looked small. The thunder outside rolled closer, and with it came the echo of chairs, shifting dresses, rustling nervous hands, adjusting silverware just to make noise. Amara turned her gaze toward the guests, not accusing, not pleading, simply measuring. "If anyone here still doubts my presence," she said softly, "check the deed posted in the lobby." One man stood abruptly and hurried out. Two women followed. Within moments, half the room had their phones out searching, scrolling, gasping. Margaret's face drained of color. "What did you do?" Amara's tone was a whisper, calm, lethal. "I built while you belittled." The lights flickered again, and for the first time since the evening began, the storm outside sounded softer than the one inside. Margaret tried one last time to speak, but her voice faltered under the truth, pressing in from every direction. Amara didn't move. She didn't gloat. She simply lifted her glass and said, "To clarity, it's long overdue." And as she drank, the ballroom that once shimmered for the Wexlers now belonged to her silence. The ballroom doors burst open as if the storm itself had entered. Two uniformed guards stepped in confusion on their faces. Margaret's voice rose above the noise, brittle but commanding. "There you are. Remove her from my event immediately." The taller guard hesitated, glancing between the two women. "Which guest, ma'am?" Margaret's arm shot out, finger trembling. "That one, the imposter in white." Amara didn't flinch. She simply turned toward the men, the faintest curve of a smile at the corner of her lips. "Imposter," she repeated. "That's a heavy accusation. You might want to check with your employer before you act on it." The younger guard frowned. "Our employer is the estate management team, ma'am." Amara's gaze was steady. "Good. Then you already work for me." The words slipped through the room like a knife through glass. The older guard blinked. "Excuse me, Lewis Holdings," Amara said. "Check your payroll. The logo's on every check you've ever cashed." A murmur rose again, this time not from shock, but from realization. Margaret froze, her hand still raised like a broken statue. "That's ridiculous," she hissed. "You can't just claim to own a place because you—" The event coordinator stepped forward, tablet in hand, voice shaking. "She's not claiming it, Mrs. Wexler." "She does. The deed transfer's public. Lewis Holdings purchased the entire estate 3 months ago." Margaret's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Jaden's camera captured everything, her disbelief, the collective gasp, the slow pivot of power made visible. "You humiliated yourself for free," Amara said quietly. "That's the most expensive mistake of all." For a long moment, all anyone heard was the soft hum of the chandeliers. Ethan stood eyes wide, whispering, "Amara, you didn't tell me." She turned to him gently. "Because I wanted to see if love could stand without leverage." Margaret snapped back to life, desperate to salvage something. "You think you can come into my world, steal my son, buy my home, and take my dignity?" Amara stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't take what people hand away so easily." Gasps. One woman at table 2 actually clapped once before stopping herself. Margaret reached for a water glass, her hands trembling. "You'll regret this." Amara nodded once. "No, you will." The taller guard cleared his throat softly. "Ma'am," he said to Margaret, with all due respect, "the property owner has final authority on any removal order." What she spat. He turned to Amara. "Mrs. Lewis, do you want us to escort anyone out?" That question, simple procedural, shattered the last illusion of control Margaret had left. Amara didn't answer right away. She looked around the room at the witnesses who had seen arrogance dressed as tradition and silence dressed as grace. Then she looked back at the guards. "No," she said. "She's already leaving, just not on her feet." Margaret sank slowly into her chair, her glass tipping water spilling like confession across the linen. And for the first time that night, no one dared to laugh. The rain outside thickened, tapping the windows like a slow drum. Inside, Margaret sat stiff and pale, her authority dripping away with the condensation. The chandelier light above her seemed colder now, less forgiving. Amara turned slightly, addressing the guards. "You can stay," she said gently. "No one needs to be thrown out yet." The older one nodded, stepping aside. The younger lowered his eyes in respect. Margaret found her breath again, the tremor in her voice disguised as defiance. "You've embarrassed yourself enough for one night. This is a wedding dinner, not a business coup," Amara replied without looking at her. "You made it public. I'm just keeping the audience honest." She took her seat again, calm as stone. The sound of her chair sliding back echoed louder than any outburst could have. "Now," she said, turning her gaze to the event manager standing frozen by the curtain, "continue dinner service. We're not done celebrating." The staff hesitated, then moved. Slowly, dishes reappeared. Silver cutlery trembled. Conversation whispered back to life, but differently this time. People weren't talking about love anymore. They were talking about power. Ethan leaned closer, his voice cracking under the weight of disbelief. You really own this." Amara didn't look at him. "I don't own this, Ethan. I own everything it pretends to represent." He fell silent, staring into his glass, seeing the reflection of a man who'd just realized he married history, not charity. Across the table, Margaret gripped her pearls until they left marks in her skin. "So this is your revenge," she whispered. "Humiliate me in front of everyone." Amara shook her head slowly. "Revenge is noisy. This is correction." A low murmur rippled through the crowd again, admiration, disbelief, fear. Someone whispered, "She's unreal." Another said, "No, she's what real looks like when it finally stops apologizing." Jaden's phone was still recording. His eyes shimmered with something between awe and justice. "She's rewriting the script," he murmured. Amara turned toward him. "You," she said softly. "You were brave enough to keep watching when everyone else looked away. Remember this moment, Jaden. You'll need it when people test your worth." He nodded, eyes wet. "Yes, ma'am." Then she looked back at Margaret. "You once said I married up, but that assumes you were standing above me." Margaret's lips parted, ready to strike back, but the words betrayed her. They came out small. "You think money buys respect, Amara?" Leaned forward, her voice low, surgical. "No, integrity does. Money just removes the excuse to ignore it." The guests were silent, not frozen anymore, listening. Lightning flashed again, and in that brief burst of light, Amara's white gown gleamed like armor. She raised her glass and said, almost gently, "To the women who learn to stay silent long enough for their enemies to speak first." Glasses lifted hesitantly, one after another. Margaret looked around, realizing the room had turned. Not against her, beyond her. She wasn't the center anymore. She was a cautionary tale. And as the thunder rolled above them, Amara's calm was the only thing that didn't shake. The storm outside began to fade, but inside the ballroom, something else was still building a quiet reckoning. Amara set her glass down, fingers steady against the crystal stem. "Since we're discussing ownership," she said, "perhaps transparency will help." Margaret looked up, exhausted and defiant. "Transparency, please. You've already performed enough for one night." Amara reached for her phone, black, sleek, silent, and tapped once. The ballroom projector behind her flickered to life. A document appeared on the wall, the estate deed logo stamped in the corner, Lewis Holdings Incorporated. The guests gasped. Amara's voice was calm. "This isn't about humiliation. It's about clarity. You called me an imposter. But here's the truth. The house where you raised your children, the land where this ballroom stands, it belongs to me." Margaret's hand covered her mouth. Ethan's chair scraped against the floor. "That's not possible," Margaret whispered. "This property has been in our family for 78 years, Amara finished softly. "Until last quarter when your family trust defaulted on its renovation loan. I bought the debt. The title came with it." A silence so thick it felt alive swallowed the room. Amara continued, her voice even. "You taught me something tonight, Mrs. Wexler. You made me remember how often people like me are told to earn our seat, to prove we belong. But here's the irony, I don't need a seat. I own the table. It wasn't a boast. It was a statement of fact, cold and simple." Cameras clicked. Someone whispered, "This can't be real." Jaden, still filming, murmured, "It's very real." Ethan tried to stand. You planned this." Amara's gaze softened. "No, Ethan. I built this. Long before you proposed, long before your mother Googled my net worth. I've been building for years quietly while people like her were laughing." Margaret's voice cracked. "Why marry into something you already own? Because love," Amara said, "isn't a transaction. But respect is. And tonight you overdrew your account." A few guests covered their mouths. One man muttered, "Lord have mercy." Amara turned toward the screen again. The projection shifted. A second document appeared, the announcement of the Lewis Foundation for Women in Business, listed as the new beneficiary of the estate. This mansion, she said, will host mentorship programs for women of color starting next spring. Every room that once dismissed someone will now open its doors. The applause began small, hesitant, respectful, then grew louder, fuller, unstoppable. Margaret sat motionless, pearls slack around her neck, eyes wet. Amara stood slowly. Her voice lowered to a whisper meant for every phone recording every witness in that room. You wanted to remind me of my place, so I bought it. The crowd erupted, some clapping, some in tears, all changed. And in that storm-lit room, justice didn't roar. It stood radiant and calm, wearing white. For a long moment, applause and disbelief tangled in the same air. The chandelier crystals trembled with every clap, scattering light like confetti made of truth. Margaret sat motionless, her hands gripping the edge of the table as if the marble itself might save her. Around her faces that once mirrored superiority now reflected something closer to shame. Ethan rose halfway from his chair, torn between his mother and the woman standing across the room. Amara, he began, but the words collapsed before they formed. There was nothing left to defend. Jaden's phone was still recording the red light pulsing like a heartbeat. She really did it, he whispered. She turned humiliation into equity. Amara looked around the ballroom, the guests, the staff, the walls gilded in history that never included people like her. Everyone here just witnessed something bigger than me, she said softly. You saw how legacy reacts when it's asked to share the table. Her tone wasn't angry. It was measured, deliberate, the calm voice of someone who no longer needed validation. This house, she continued, was built on exclusion. It will now operate on inclusion. Those doors, she gestured to the massive carved entrance, will stay open to women who were told they didn't belong. A woman near the back stood and started clapping. Another followed. Soon, nearly everyone was on their feet. Not out of politeness, but out of awe. Ethan watched her eyes heavy with regret. You never needed this family's name, he said quietly. Amara turned toward him. No one ever does. They just need to stop believing. Power only speaks in one accent. A few reporters' guests who had come under the guise of society coverage began typing frantically on their phones. This moment was going viral before dessert could be served. Margaret finally stood trembling but proud in her stubbornness. You think this spectacle earns you respect? Amara faced her directly. No, it earns you reflection. Margaret's jaw tightened. You may own this place, but you will never have our name. Amara smiled, slow and knowing. Names fade. Deeds don't. The room erupted, some in applause, some in gasps, some in quiet tears. Jaden lowered his phone, whispering to the server beside him. She didn't just win. She rewrote the ending. Margaret took a step back, unsteady in heels that suddenly felt borrowed. The world she ruled had just been foreclosed, politely, publicly, irrevocably. Ethan moved closer to Amara, his voice barely audible. Do you still want to stay? She looked at him, eyes soft but resolute. I don't leave what I own. I transform it. A final flash of lightning illuminated them both, the man still searching for balance, the woman who had already found it. When the thunder rolled, no one flinched, because they all understood the storm hadn't destroyed the house. It had revealed who really built it. Morning came quietly, washing the mansion in a pale light that made the night before feel almost mythical. Almost, but not quite. The evidence was everywhere, champagne glasses left, half-full petals crushed into the marble phones, buzzing with headlines that hadn't slept. Black CEO bride redefines power at her own wedding. Lewis Holdings owns historic Wexler estate. You wanted to remind me of my place, so I bought it. Every paper, every screen carried her face, serene, unbothered, unstoppable. Inside the now silent ballroom, Margaret Wexler sat alone at the same table where she'd once ruled the night. Her pearls were gone, her voice quieter than she remembered. The echo of applause still haunted the walls. A door opened. Amara stepped in no gown this time, just a tailored black suit and calm composure that made the room stand to attention without anyone asking. Margaret didn't look up right away. I suppose you're here to enjoy the view of your empire, she said bitterly. Amara walked closer. Empires don't interest me. Accountability does. She placed a folded letter on the table. That's the formal notice. The Wexler family has until Friday to vacate the private residence. The foundation begins restoration next week. Margaret's breath caught. You can't be serious. I'm rarely anything else, Amara replied. For a heartbeat, Margaret looked ready to beg, but pride smothered mercy. You've made your point. Amara shook her head. No, you made it. I just wrote the punctuation. A soft knock interrupted them. Jaden stepped inside with a small box in his hands. He looked nervous but determined. Ma'am, the media is waiting outside. They want your comment before you leave. Amara took the box and smiled. Not today. She turned to Margaret. I don't want cameras for this part. Dignity doesn't need an audience. Margaret frowned. Then what do you want? Amara set the box down in front of her. Inside lay the wedding ring Margaret had mocked the night before. But next to it was another engraved simply with the words, property of no one. I'm returning this house to its purpose, Amara said. To rebuild what arrogance broke. You're welcome to visit when the doors open again as a guest. Margaret's lip quivered. You're really doing this? Amara nodded. Justice doesn't end with a headline. It begins when the powerful finally have to sit with their silence. She turned to leave, pausing just before the door. One more thing, she said softly. Tell Ethan his mother raised a man who couldn't stand between love and legacy, but I forgive him anyway. Then she walked out, heels clicking against marble, echoing like a verdict. Outside, reporters surged forward, microphones raised. But Amara didn't stop. She simply said, no statement. The story already told itself. And when she stepped into the sunlight, the storm was gone, but its consequence still glowed on every screen in America. By the end of the week, the mansion no longer felt like the Wexler's kingdom. The portraits of ancestors had been taken down, replaced by scaffolds and blueprints. The ballroom that once witnessed humiliation now hummed with purpose workers, architects, and a new brass plaque waiting to be unveiled. It read, The Lewis Foundation for Women in Business, where power learns to belong. A small crowd gathered under the morning Sunday journalists, young entrepreneurs, neighborhood families. Jaden was there too in a crisp uniform with a new badge that read, Foundation Operations Assistant. He'd traded the wine bottle for a clipboard and a future. When Amara stepped out of her car, the murmurs quieted. No designer gown this time. No need for spectacle. Just composure, that still cinematic calm that made people instinctively move aside. She stood before the cameras not for attention but for record. This place, she began, used to close its doors to people who didn't fit its idea of value. Now it will open them for those who never stopped creating it. Applause followed, but she didn't linger in it. Her eyes scanned the horizon, deliberate, steady. Power isn't proven by who you silence. It's proven by who you empower. Jaden watched her tears welling as he whispered to a reporter. She turned a wedding into a revolution. Behind the gates, Margaret watched from the passenger seat of a car veiled by tinted glass. She looked older, not defeated, but smaller. Her world had narrowed to a rearview mirror. Ethan sat beside her quiet, a man who'd finally seen what legacy looks like when it earns its name. Do you hate her? He asked softly. Margaret shook her head after a long pause. No. I envy her. Back at the podium, Amara placed her hand on the new plaque. To every girl who's ever been told she doesn't belong in the room, she said, voice rising just enough for the microphones to catch the tremor beneath it. Build your own room. Then buy the building. The crowd erupted. Some clapped. Some cried. Some simply stood there, realizing they were watching history that hadn't asked permission. A breeze swept through the courtyard, lifting the veil of white fabric that had once decorated her wedding arch, now repurposed as the foundation's banner. Amara looked up, eyes tracing it against the sky, and smiled. Dignity, she whispered, isn't something you fight for. It's something you stand in. Before she left, a young woman approached nervously, holding out a notebook. Miss Lewis, may I quote? That Amara nodded. Of course. That's what stories are for, to remind the world that silence was never weakness. It was strategy. The cameras clicked one last time, and as she walked toward her car, the new owner, the quiet storm, the woman who rewrote power, the sun broke through the clouds. Justice didn't roar that morning. It smiled.